So thank you for attending this evening and welcome to Waterfront for All's speaker series. Um, WTF Jets at the Island again. I think you know that our topic will be the prospect of jets again. Some of us have been, some people here this evening, and some of you probably attending may have been involved in the this discourse and this debate, which was successfully adjudicated against jets in just over 10 years ago. And we are going to be updating us all on the current circumstances. So this evening we have our very own Ron Jenkins, a Waterfront for All National Yacht Club member, who was intimately involved in the fight last time, and he's going to be giving us some background, some key background information. We're pleased to have Paul Bedford, the former Toronto Chief Planner, with us this evening, speaking tonight as a private citizen. We have our very own Ed Hoare with us this evening, who will be giving us some thoughts on the potential business
Hi,
case.
it'll go.
Could you please mute yourself, ma'am? Thank you. And we will have Phil Pothen, who is the Council Ontario Environment Program Manager and Land Use and Development Program Manager with Environmental Defense, who will be our final speaker of the evening. So that's our review. I can go over that again in a moment, but let me begin with.
So Norm from No Jets TL will be speaking after Phil
Oh, yeah,
Pilton.
sorry, Norm. Did I
Don't
forget to
forget the
mention?
closer.
Oh, you're the closer. You're the closer. Hi, Norm.
Hello.
Thank you for that.
Pleasure.
I I don't know, Norm. I just forget about you. It's terrible. Thanks.
We'll
Well,
get over the
Norm,
heartbreak.
yes. Well, Norm, you've also had many hats in your life, but tonight you're wearing your No Jets hat, right? Do you ha yeah, you have your No Jets t-shirt you're wearing tonight, which I appreciate. Um, Thank you. So, one, two, three, four, five brilliant speakers. So we're very, very thrilled to have all of you with us. So, with no further ado, I'm going to begin with our land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that we are meeting on the land that is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, and we thank our First Nations brothers and sisters for the stewardship they've shown over this land for um, thousands upon thousands upon thousands of years. So, taking it from the top one more time, um, we are going to start off with Ron Jenkins, then Paul Bedford, then Ed Hoare, then Phil Pothen, and then Norm Pasquale from No Jets. That might be a theme. I don't know. No Jets might be a theme tonight. I'm not sure. We'll find out. So, take it away,
Okay.
Ron.
Thank you all for coming and for your interest. I think this is a very engaging topic for many people. What I'll do is I'll start by sharing my screen and you'll see what I'm seeing, I hope. Okay. I'm hoping you can see that.
Um, yes.
Okay. So I'm going to be trying to tighten my focus a little bit because it's such a big topic. And I want to be talking about the regulatory environment for the airport now and in the future, and how that plays into a lot of considerations. So there's too much information and maybe not enough visualization. So I'm going to try and work on the visualization to a degree. But I'll start with a question. Is Doug Ford's plan for the Billy Bishop Airport like the Porter Jets proposal of 2013? The answer is no. What are the province's detailed plans at the moment? There aren't any. But having said that, it's not like the Porter Jets proposal. There are things that we can learn from that proposal and how it was assessed that look forward. But to recap the Porter just briefly, they had two requests. They wanted to modify the Tripartite Agreement to permit runway lengthening, and they wanted to get permission to use a jet aircraft, in particular the CS-100 Bombardier plane. This is an early one of their diagrams, looking at adding 200 meters to each end of the runway, but you can actually see that it doesn't even have taxiways in this diagram. Those sorts of things got filled in later. That was the aircraft that they were talking about, which was not actually a production aircraft at the time. These days, this aircraft is actually an Airbus 220-100.
Mm-hmm.
In 2015, though, the federal Minister of Transport, Marc Garneau, put out a couple of tweets to say he's been enjoying learning about his files, including the Toronto Island Airport, and he can confirm that the Government of Canada position is the same as the Liberal Party of Canada commitment. We will not reopen the Tripartite Agreement for YTZ. So that decision not to reopen the Tripartite Agreement wasn't really accompanied with much in the way of reasons. But a lot of the province's direction can be inferred after the fact by things that came out later, including an environmental assessment, changes that have happened in the years since 2013, 2014, new information, new legislation, new aerodrome standards. I'll just go briefly through the approach of the Government of Ontario. Doug Ford is talking about proceeding under Bill 5, the Special Economic Zones Act. And I won't go into much detail other than to say it's an aggressive approach because he will, in this approach, designate development sites where provincial and municipal laws don't apply. So he can bypass certain things, certain types of environmental assessments, and override provincial and municipal regulations. It doesn't give him power over federal matters, but he will want to vastly increase passenger traffic, he has said, and vastly increase the Billy Bishop Airport footprint. So we're really talking about a maximalist vision for him. He also says that he will, this is from the budget, that they'll take ownership of the City of Toronto's lands around the airport, which differs a little bit from their press release, which says, as well as take ownership of the city-owned lands in the airport. Those lands are about 20% of the airport lands, and he would manage that through an expropriation. Those are the airport lands and the ownership, and the city lands are in green here. And for people interested in the history, those were sandbars before this land was filled in by the Harbor Commission back in the mid-20th or early to mid-20th century. The federal government has been a little bit non-committal. It's talking about an interesting vision, big possibilities, ongoing conversation. I think other speakers will touch on that stuff a little bit more. And the transportation minister is fronting a lot of the vision. In addition to that, yesterday, Mark Carney, Olivia Chow, and Doug Ford had a joint announcement of housing partnership, where there would be federal and provincial contributions of $4.4 billion each, and cutting municipal development charges in half, and so on. But one of the things was there would be three-way Waterfront East LRT funding to connect Union Station to the Portlands to service a community there of 150,000 people, and expecting or talking about 50,000 passengers of daily ridership. You would say this conflicts with the airport expansion plans, and I think that's kind of intrinsic in the whole structure of this, but we'll get back to it. Is that Ed? And so the question here is the 2013 Porter proposal an appropriate baseline for looking at the province's proposed expansion? And I'll give you the spoiler and say it's not really. The Porter proposal was bad, but the Doug Ford proposal is worse, and I will get to saying why. But we can look at what's changed in the years since 2013 and around the airport, around the province, and around the waterfront. I'm going to be looking particularly at Billy Bishop traffic and TP 312 5th edition, which requires things like jet blast barriers, runway approach lighting, runway and safety areas, airspace and airfield requirements. And in those airspace requirements also, they relate to things in the portlands like the Ukweman-Minising Precinct Plan, Portlands Development, and even to some degree Central Waterfront Development. A lot of the other things are changes that maybe swing the balance to Pearson or to Billy Bishop one way or the other. Things like the Union Pearson Express, which is an argument to say that we don't need to put so much emphasis on Billy Bishop. Oops, that's not what I want to do. So first of all, I want to just look at the airport traffic. This was a diagram that came out from the Port Authority in 2014, where that red line is. And at the time, they had 2.43 million total passengers. Everything before that was historic airline traffic at the airport. If you go back before 2006, basically it's almost a flat line. It was a non-commercial airport for most of the time. So the base case was 202 slots, a slot being a takeoff or a landing at the airport. That is the current situation still, but their proposal included increasing the number of slots to 242. So an addition of 40, somehow they thought that could bring them up from traffic in the 2.3 million, 2.5 million range up to 5.5 million. With that magical change in market demand. This is what actually happened. The purple line shows things tracking along more or less, but then starting to drop, then COVID. So the two lowest points in that purple line are the COVID years where the airport was not actually sending many planes out and no commercial passenger flights. The number climbed again afterwards, but has kind of flatlined and now is starting to drop off again. So the airport now, if you look at this current number, the 2025 passenger numbers are back essentially where the airport was in 2011. So they're not moving forward as an airport. And then we take the provincial government saying that the airport currently serves 2 million. We'll take that with a grain of salt. Passengers a year, my typo. A number that is expected to rise to 10 million under the Port Authority's modernization plan, which we don't know what it is. But 10 million passengers per year is a more than five-fold increase above current passenger traffic. How would that be accomplished? What does 10 million passengers per year really mean? If we take a look at a couple of typical jets, the Airbus A220 and the Embraer, which is the current Porter Airlines jet, the E195-E2, they average about 125, 130 passengers per flight with that is their capacity. Flight occupancy brings that number down to something around 88%. If you're talking about 88 passengers per flight, if you're talking about a 70% occupancy on a flight, which is being generous historically. Billy Bishop has not had that high an occupancy on his flights. So 10 million passengers annually is 27,000 and change passengers per day average over all the days of the year. The Scotiabank Arena seating capacity is 19,800. So you're basically talking about a Scotia Bank full of people, and then another 50% on top of that coming through the airport every day. If all the flights were jets with 88 passengers per jet, you'd have 311 flights per day. If the only aircraft were the existing Bombardier Q400s, they're smaller planes at 70% occupancy, you'd have 53 passengers per typical flights. That would be 517 flights per day. And remember that the airport here has only got 16 operational hours per day inside curfew, or outside curfew, I guess, which way you look at it. So for the jets, that's more than 19 flights per hour, or for Q400s, that would be 32 flights per hour. They'd be coming in every 2 minutes, which is not only crazy, I think it's just technically impossible. Here are a couple of graphs of traffic. This is Pearson over here. This is Pearson, numbers increasing, COVID, and then numbers back on the increase again. Billy Bishop, numbers increasing, COVID, and then wobbling. And the green is actual, the orange or yellow out to the right is projected numbers. So in a way, you know, this almost looks like a life support system for Billy Bishop, trying to get some more people there. There's lots of capacity now. There are lots of slots not being filled by planes taking off and landing, and there are lots of planes with excess capacity. Then there's the Transport Canada Aviation Standard, TP312, 5th edition. And what's that all about? That is the standard that governs aerodrome design and airspace. So the Porter proposal was designed and evaluated under the provisions of the 4th edition of this regulation. And that was the standard in place at the time. It continues to operate under that 4th edition. At the same time, that standard was updated in July 2015 to the 5th edition. And the 5th edition applies to work going forward at Billy Bishop. So it's important to understand the differences between the 4th and the 5th edition. The 4th edition is grandfathered into the operating airport at Billy Bishop right now until significant new work is done. And at that point, the updated standard comes into force. So it would come into force for any of the type of thing that Doug Ford has been talking about. It's also in force for the runway and safety areas that are being implemented there now. The updated 5th edition defines new and in many cases stricter safety and design requirements. And when applied to Billy Bishop, that includes things like runway approach lighting systems and numerous significant airspace surface and airfield changes. Runway approach lighting systems were dismissed from the environmental assessment that turned up, I guess what now, a little bit more than a month ago, a little bit less than a month ago, but it was written in 2017 and probably really got started in 2015. Additionally, Transport Canada, after a long process, adopted a requirement for runway and safety areas that are intended to reduce the danger of aircraft either overrunning a runway or landing short. Billy Bishop is unique. It's already operating with a tightly constrained runway without sufficient land mass, and it's got water at both ends. However, a hidden, I'm calling it hidden, environmental assessment that was completed in 2017, but never saw the light of day until very recently, looks at a lot of these issues. It is an evaluation of the Porter proposal under the TP 312 4th edition, not the current 5th edition. And a lot of the meat of this, as tends to be with reports like this, is in the appendices. And I've just highlighted some of the areas that that are worth a look if you get to it. I'm going to be looking particularly at the built form and land use effects assessment portion of this. So some of this relates to runway approach lighting and jet blast barriers. The EA, the 2017 EA, I'll call it an EA, did describe jet blast barriers as part of the design, but not runway approach lighting. However, so what you see here is sort of an aerial view. The number ones at each end are the landmass that would be added in the Porter proposal. More than that would be added in all likelihood in the Doug Ford plan. Number two shows jet blast deflectors per the Toronto Port Authority EA. The marine exclusion zones are these blue lines here and here. They haven't changed for a long time, but they would change because once you institute runway approach lighting, then you have a much, much, much longer water space occupied by that lighting. This diagram uses specifications of about 700 meters, I believe. The shortest runway approach lighting is about 420 meters. But you can see on the right, this whole configuration reaches far across the inner harbor, and on the west, it comes very close to, well, it goes really past the entrance to the marina at Ontario Place. So it's a vast expansion. Looked at it from a different point of view. It's the same information, but you can see really, this is the terminal warehouse here. So you get an idea of the extent of this expansion. And on the west, you have this kind of thing, which poses real questions as to the viability of navigation through the Western Gap. The sound blast barriers would be 20 feet high per the EA. And this is drawn to follow the line that is in that EA. Same on the western side. So they would not be pretty. They might not be some color of maroon. They might be something a little more attractive, but what are you going to do to make that look good? The runway and safety areas are another thing. There were three options under consideration, but the point here is that the Transport Canada regulations said runway and safety areas need to be instituted at the airport. The Port Authority gave three options. This is option one, which the city ultimately approved. And that's their cost estimate, $61 to $64 million. The other two options are more expansive, going into all sorts of other features, which are listed here, but I won't take the time to go through them now. That's option two. And option three, you can see, is actually quite a large expansion of landmass, especially on the inner harbor side. What they wanted to do is create taxiways on this newly added land. They would have noise walls, again, your jet blast deflectors, and so on. It's interesting, though, about the timeframes for this. In the public meetings on July 17th, 2024, they talked about the implementation schedule for four options: an engineered material arresting system, and the RISA options I've just showed you. And this is how long they were talking about these things taking. They modified that in the October meeting by eliminating the engineered material arresting system altogether. On dubious grounds, I will say, we've seen the report that backed that decision up, and it's really not very solid. However, they estimated 18 months work for the approved option, RISA option 1, which needs to be done by July 12th, 2027. So their estimate already puts them past that date. I think that maybe the estimate can't be as solid as all that, because Transport Canada is going to shut them down if they don't have those by then. They got a 3-year reprieve, in fact, because COVID dropped the passenger traffic at the airport below 325,000 passengers per year, which reset the clock for them to fulfill this. if COVID hadn't happened, this would already be done. But I will say, they asked for an extension to the term of the tripartite agreement to secure financing for this runway and safety area work. And they got that from the city council. The tripartite agreement term was extended to 2045. It would have ended in 2033. Then we get to the 5th edition and talk about airspace requirements applied to the portlands, because a lot of the discussion has been around this topic. First of all, this is the existing Billy Bishop airspace, and it's what you see here. I mean, these are 2.5 kilometer lengths right here and here. An airport is a pretty big thing. Just, you're not talking about the landmass in the center here. You're talking about all of the area that it influences in its surfaces, as they're called, where things can not stick into the space where airplanes are flying and such. What you notice over here, actually, that little point there is the Hearn generating station stack, which does intrude into the airspace now. So the 5th edition tightens and more rigorously defines airspace requirements. And as it is today, the City of Toronto is rolling out plans for buildings in the newly available portlands and is already feeling the constraints of the airport, because although it's operating under the 4th edition, it already affects a constraint on building heights in the portlands. This is to be expected, as the airport has chronological precedence. It was there first in terms of airspace occupancy, if you want to call it that. With those constraints in mind, building heights were analyzed in the 2017 Porter proposal, but note that they did not apply the new surfaces that will be in effect at Billy Bishop if the aerodrome design goes forward, as Doug Ford is talking about.
I read it. It's good. Thank you.
The visualizations on the following pages are modeled on the following. The runway design that they use is based on the runway designs in the 2017 TPA Environmental Study Report, that EA. The object limitation surfaces and transitional surfaces conform to the 5th edition of TP 312. The Ukweman-Minising building forms in the model are based on current City of Toronto designs as far as heights go. Buildings in these illustrations that are located south of Ukweman-Minising are generic illustrations. They're modeled to heights of approximately 87 meters at the water's edge and approximately 100 meters further to the east. Those heights are chosen to situate the buildings below the TP 312 5th edition object limitation surface. And the aircraft modeled here, it really doesn't matter too much. It's more of an icon, but it's the Bombardier CS-100 now, that Airbus 220. So before we get to those illustrations, I should point out that if anybody is thinking, the city and Ports Toronto and so on were thinking about all this back in 2015. The EA, and this is a page out of it, shows building height considerations already in place. And the AZR is the governing height approach for that. But as I was saying before, it was only in March 26 that this material became public under Freedom of Information Access. So this diagram needs a little bit of explanation, but I will not try to spend too much time on it. The yellow area is what would be governing under TP 312 5th edition. And there's actually another slope that is the FAA, the American proposal, which is lower down still. But the current airspace design is higher than that. So when TP 312 5th edition comes into force, it will mean that building heights in the portlands can't be as high as they are under the current regulatory environment. I hope that's clear. The glide slopes here are for planes incoming. They have some exemptions for steeper approaches. So here's a view sort of from over the harbor looking east. And these surfaces are TP312 5th edition. So these are Ukwemin buildings that the city has already specified heights for, obtruding, penetrating that surface. And then these are the buildings, the ones at the water's edge I mentioned were 87 meters, and the ones further back are 100 meters. They're modeled to be underneath the object limitation surface. That's how high construction would go if this were in force. And then, of course, you've got your Hearn stack here as well. Here's another view looking northwest. So you're looking out towards the airport from over the portlands. And the same surfaces here, you have aircraft approaching to fly in. And a look north again. And here are buildings again. These would comply under TP 312 4th edition, but not 5th edition. And one more view like that. And what I think might be good to show here is, can you see this? I hope you can. It's kind of a flyover. Are you seeing that or not?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. So those 8 buildings are below the object limitation surface. They're fictional creations, but they're designed to fit under that surface.
Come on.
You'd have some low-flying aircraft coming over buildings in this scenario. These are buildings penetrating the surface here. I have a couple of others, but in the interest of time, I will skip them. Let's see. Are you back at the presentation with me?
Yeah.
Portland's looking west. I will just note that back in 2011, Doug Ford had a plan for the development and potential in the Portlands that had buildings that would also violate the airspace that he's talking about getting in the way today. So this is his, people talk about the Ferris wheel. There were lots of other elements to this. Now, those airfield requirements, the TP312, I was talking about object limitation surfaces and transition surfaces. In addition, the requirements also affect things that happen on the ground at the airport. A report in 2015 by Oliver Wyman was commissioned by Air Canada to look at jet operations at Billy Bishop Toronto City Airport. And it came out in 2015, just before TP312 5th edition came into force. And what, I guess about 3 or 4 months before the jet expansion was shut down. This report contrasts with the Port Authority report in 2 ways. It focuses narrowly on airfield requirements, and it also applies TP312 5th edition standards. It also develops a cost estimate that wildly differs from the cost estimate that Porter was putting forward, like a 10-fold difference. What they were talking about in particular was that the Porter design was including not enough runway length for the proposed jets, in fact. That
Come on.
those jets would have trouble in hot weather for takeoff and in rainy weather for landing. So although the Porter proposal would have brought the airport length up to, well, let's say 5,440 feet, they say that it should really be 6,000 feet. And they also believe that the governing standard should be TP 12 5th edition, and work that was being done under the 4th edition would have needed to be completed by September 2017. Obviously, that didn't happen. Among other things, though, the TP 312 5th edition requires wider clearances on each side of the runway center line and greater separation between the taxiway and the runway. And what that means for the aircraft under consideration for the airport is that they would not be able to park on the south edge of the existing terminal because their tail fins would be sticking too high up into the airspace for the runway. They also say that the pavement at the airport is not sufficient for the weight of those jets. They supply some details to that effect. They talk about adding distance to the marine exclusion zones. They talk about relocating airfield facilities south of the runway because the space gets too small to the north, and that runway approach lighting could be required as well. On the right, the table is a summary of changes, and the essential things that we're really talking about here are things like the width of the runway strip. And what they were diagramming here were planes sitting at the terminal. It's kind of not a great diagram, but it's not to scale, for example. But what you see are the tail fins of these planes under the 4th edition compared to the 5th edition. And in the 5th edition, these tail fins are obstacles to that. So what's the implication here? If you can't park a plane on the south end of the terminal, you either have to try and find space elsewhere or move the terminal or move the runway. Those are your choices. And those choices, as well as many others, go into their costing diagram. That is where they get their $1 billion estimate for the work at the airport. We don't have a Doug Ford estimate. We'll just have to leave that for now. The economic case, though, for a jet expansion is ludicrously bad because it's not even really there. And I will just point out that it lacks basic things like cost-benefit analysis, externalities, as they call them in the economics world, alternative substitution effects with Pearson. You know, I mean, how much money do you need to spend to move a passenger from Pearson down to Billy Bishop? They can fly through Pearson, and so on. Who pays the expansion costs? Do they go into airport improvement fees? Does the general public pay it? And in what time frames? If we're talking about something in excess of $1 billion, these are questions that really need to be answered. I'll let Ed talk a little bit further about that, because the budget just came out and there was no cost model for the airport expansion. There were issues about financing that have come up before at the Therme Spa, Ontario Place, the Gardiner Expressway, Highway 401, Ontario Science Centre, and then people outside of the city of Toronto were saying, hey, what about us? Healthcare, education, roads, and so on. I will also note that I saw Pierre Poilievre today trashing the idea of the Ontario-Quebec City high-speed rail link. I'll leave that for somebody else to talk about. A boondoggle. That's quite a word. Talking about process, understand that Transport Canada cannot approve or disapprove the project without a plan. this is an important point. It's not the only point. There are political things flowing around this. But the fact is, they need a plan, and they don't have a plan. And they can't approve or disapprove a project without a plan. Can't say, just, I'll go ahead, build the airport, and we'll just make it work. It doesn't happen that way. So the process is backwards, as it was with the Porter proposal. When Rob Ford issued his request for consideration for the Porter proposal, he basically walked it onto executive committee. It had a modicum of aviation intelligence, but both were attempts to shortcut or short circuit design and consultation. The reports, the news releases have brought a lot of, names forward: Steenstra, Gerson, the Toronto Region Board of Trade, Ontario Chamber of Commerce, and so on. These are just pitchmen, I would say, is the best way of putting it. But the pitch comes with some extravagant claims, saying that Billy Bishop is a major economic driver for the province, contributing 900 million in GDP and 1.8 billion in economic output each year, while supporting 9,000 jobs in 2024. You've got to remember there was 1.75 approximately million passengers. So that's putting a lot of economic output on each one of those poor people. The claim also here is looking forward, estimating the airport's activities will contribute up to 8.5 billion.
Oh, we just lost this.
These are Trump numbers, I would say. In any case, the site itself is not physically suited to become a major jet hub. It's close to tall buildings. It has steep approaches. It's got nearby marine operations. It's got a taxiway close to the runway. It's got limited vehicle access. All of those things are objective realities that make expansion either difficult or expensive or both. And here's my little fun fact. Pearson is 1,867 hectares. Billy Bishop is 85 hectares, which makes Pearson 22 times larger. The city has made a degree of response earlier this week in council, requesting the city solicitor to report to the next meeting of city council on potential legal options to defend the city of Toronto's interests, including property ownership in the Billy Bishop lands and other important city-owned waterfront lands. It passed fairly handily. I don't know enough about the law and expropriation and so on, but I can say that if Doug Ford expropriates the lands from the city, he gets 20% of the airport lands. He doesn't get the whole airport. Something to consider. I will give you my apologies now, because there might be people here tonight who want to hear about noise contours, such as these that appear in the EA, or they might want to hear about pollution. Again, there's content in the EA. I just don't have time tonight to go into all that. So what is Billy Bishop Toronto City Airport? I look at it this way. It's like a pot-bound plant. It's grown to the limits of its container. Now, normally we would take that plant and repot it into a larger container, but Toronto doesn't have a larger container. The runways are maxed out. The airspace is maxed out. The access to the airport is maxed out. Everything's already there. So I think that really, when you look at the airport in this sort of very simplistic way, you think, how do we make it bigger? Or do we just say, oh, we continue with the airport as it is? It's not going to die in its pot. It's not going to grow into a, I don't know, 4-foot weed plant. It's just going to stay what it is. And then I threw in a trivia question just at the end here. What percentage of the Toronto Islands are taken with housing? I'm talking about the housing on wards and Algonquin Islands. If you want to throw your answer in the chat, the next page will have the answer to that. And then I'll wrap it up. So the trust lands and housing are 4% of the island land use. It sometimes gets a little bit more mind share than that. Anyway, thank you very much for your attention, and have a good rest of the evening here. We've got some interesting speakers upcoming.
Thank you so much, Ron. I'm just going to say right now, I know some people felt that was heavy going. It was heavy going, and it is heavy going. I would like to point out that for those who might question the jets at the airport or those who might oppose it, a common thing that will be said is that people who question it and or oppose it are uninformed NIMBYs. Now I know that was a lot to absorb, and there is no exam at the end of the presentation. But the one thing Waterfront for All likes to do is share detailed information. The presentation will be available on our website in the days following this, as will a recording of this meeting. So if you want time to go through in more detail what Ron presented, we will be able to be making that available at waterfrontforall.ca as a recording, as will the recording will be posted in due course.
One thing I wanted to do that I just didn't get around to at this stage was putting in a list of references, like a little bibliography at the end of the report. It will be a list of things that you can go on the web and find and read yourself. Because there are numerous things that come from the Greater Waterfront Coalition, Transport Action Ontario, the Toronto Port Authority's EA, the Golder Health Report, the Oliver Wyman Report, and so on. And when you start looking at those, you start to get a picture of reality that is quite a bit different than what you find on Twitter or Facebook or wherever you lurk.
Well, thank you so much, Ron. Okay. It's my pleasure to go to our next speaker, Paul Bedford. As I said, for those of you who are joining us now, Paul Bedford was the former chief planner. He was the former chief planner of Toronto. And just for the record now, because Paul has a number of things he's involved with, we're just going to note for the record that Paul is speaking as a private citizen, keeping in mind his expertise and background. Thank you very much, Paul. Please take it away.
Great. Okay. Thanks a lot, everyone, for hanging in here. I'm going to try and keep this fairly simple and straightforward. You had a lot of information from Ron, and I appreciate all that. I'm very familiar with this issue. I was chief planner when the previous fixed link debate was ongoing and the previous JETS debate. I want to share some basic starting points that I think might help provide a framework that most people could probably agree with. And here they are. The first is the 2001 Central Waterfront Principles Plan called Making Waves. Why am I going back that far? Because it's important. It has 4 core principles that were adopted unanimously by City Council. They are removing barriers, making connections, building a network of spectacular waterfront parks and public spaces, promoting a clean and green environment, and creating dynamic and diverse new communities. I was the author of that plan. I'm proud of it. And the fact of the matter is, those principles stood the test of time. They're just as valid today as they were in 2001. So that's number one starting point. The second is the reality of our existing waterfront. It's a balance of a whole range of different uses. Diversity of uses that coexist on the waterfront is frankly one of the prime reasons that it works. Everything is connected to everything. People come to the waterfront for a variety of different reasons. Just think about it. There's a full range of residential, commercial, retail, cultural, community, recreation, employment, entertainment, live music, concerts, theater, educational, institution, transportation, and lots of marine activities supported by a diversity of parks and public spaces. There's a hell of a lot going on down there. And the key to success, in my view, is that there's no one overpowering or dominant use that upsets that balance that allows all those uses to coexist with each other. I think the introduction of jets would frankly change that balance. With a very busy airport generating issues that you've heard about of noise, air quality, city side congestion, marine navigation, built form, land use, and the basic public enjoyment of the waterfront. So that's the second consideration, balance. The next one is a simple one. It's that the waterfront belongs to everybody, not any one group. The waterfronts are very special because it's a unique place for all Torontonians and tourists and visitors to our city to share. It's the front door of our city where people can go to relax in a park, enjoy a meal at a restaurant, go shopping, go to a theater, rent a canoe, kayak, or sailboat, or simply sit by the water and people watch. It's a special place. People are attracted to the waterfront and, of course, the islands to see, feel, and touch the water. People want to get close to the water. It's special. And they want to enjoy the unique experience of having a front row seat on all the activities of the inner harbor. The wide variety of different uses also appeals to all ages and all incomes and all communities. One of the things I do every single summer is I take a busload of long-term care residents from Belmont House in North Toronto down to the waterfront. And you know, when I did, some of those people haven't been down there in 30 years. And they sat there and they said, I think I'm at a resort. I can't believe the transformation, the changes that have happened down here. They don't want to leave. It's a very special place. So this is a very important point. For the vast majority of Torontonians who do not own a cottage, a day on the waterfront or the islands is their green and blue oasis. It's extremely important for the vast majority of our population. And people expect that waterfront to be a place of joy, of peace, of tranquility, adventure. Nobody, I can tell you, comes down to the waterfront to watch 242 jets take off and land in the harbor. That's pretty basic. Now, the next consideration is what I'll call the government mandate for waterfront revitalization and investment. You've heard a bit about that. But in 2002, the Waterfront Revitalization Corporation, now known as Waterfront Toronto, was created with equal participation of the feds, the province, and the city. And their mandate was to build and deliver housing, neighborhoods, parks, destinations, and infrastructure to make people's lives better. They've done quite a lot over that long period of 20 plus years. There's a lot to celebrate with all the governments recently renewing that commitment to fund the mandate through the mid-2030s, even out to 2040. Here are some of the things, and most people, I think, have probably experienced it. Over the past 20 years, billions of public and private dollars have been spent to change the look and feel of the waterfront, with thousands of housing units, spectacular public spaces, the renaturalization of the Don River connecting to the inner harbor, which is a huge successful undertaking that is now known worldwide. Detailed planning and strong political support was given for Oquiminising, formerly Villiers Island, Quayside Parliament Slip Precinct, and the major East Harbor high-density multimodal transit node in a variety of mid and high-rise buildings that could range anywhere from 40, 50, or even up to 70 stories for East Harbor. You've seen some of those diagrams in Ron's presentation. All that has gone through an extensive planning process and has been approved. Also, a variety of parks. We all remember the Music Garden, of course, on the eastern end, H2O Park, but Love Park, you know, at York Street and Queens Quay, Sugar Beach, the waterfront promenade that runs from Spadina to Parliament is a fantastic space. They've all increased the attractiveness of the waterfront for Torontonians and tourists. And the most recent park that's going to open this spring, part of it is Promontory Park, which is that fabulous area overlooking the inner harbor from the Portlands. Much more is going to come over the next 10 to 15 years. So that's just all about the mandate of Waterfront Toronto. Now, my next area that I'm going to wrap up on is, so the big question is, so what if jets were introduced? How would they affect all of these things I've been talking about? What impacts need to be assessed? Well, as you've heard before, there is no actual proposal that has come forward from the Premier. It's just a lot of news in the newspapers. So the only thing we have to take a look at is the 1,000 plus page 2017 environmental assessment that was prepared for Port Toronto. And I'm going to refer to that and then go back through my categories to give you quotes from that EA. First of all, let's go to the Central Waterfront Principles Plan. Remember the 4 core principles. Well, JETS would not support any of those 4 core principles. Just a refresher: removing barriers, making connections, building a network of spectacular waterfront parks and open spaces, building a clean and green environment, and creating dynamic and diverse new communities. So let's go to the balance of multiple uses, that principle I talked about balance, why the waterfront works the way it does. Well, the first consideration would be, of course, if JETS were introduced, noise, potential impacts on air quality, environmental, public health. The EA talks about all of those. And the impacts of the jet blasts, as everyone knows who's been in a plane, when they rev up to take off, the jet blast is huge. It's very, very forceful and very substantial. That jet blast, that thrust noise from 242 aircraft movements per day, I don't care what anybody says, that would make noise. And the same when the plane lands and does the reverse thrust. We all have experienced that when we're flying. That's the first thing. The second thing is city-side transportation logistics associated with the goal of doubling the passenger volumes. That was in the EA. And the impact on the Harborfront School and the community center at Queens Quay, just north of the existing terminal. The next consideration would be JETS would exacerbate, and this is a quote from the EA, that was done for Ports Toronto. JETS would further exacerbate the relationship between local residents and the airport. The next thing they said is the ability to hold concerts at the Music Garden, Harborfront, Budweiser Stage, and Ontario Place would be disrupted by jet noise, and the proximity of those runway extensions that Ron showed you on those diagrams. It's kind of ironic. I was thinking about the Budweiser Stage, especially if you can picture that runway extension out into the lake. It goes very close to where the Budweiser Stage is. I would think there'd be a lot of competition and frustration of people trying to hold a concert while jet planes were landing and taking off. Another consideration, the desirability of living on the waterfront, I think would be obviously less attractive for people, and also the ability for people to enjoy small boats, the kayaks, the canoes, the sailing, etc., would be reduced because of those intrusions into the harbor and all of the additional traffic. So there's some of the things. Now let's go to the principle about the waterfront belongs to everyone. Well, the first thing is the extent of the east and west runways as proposed at that time, and probably would be the same or more now, of 200 meters at either end into the harbor and the lake, with much larger marine exclusion zones for boats that would reduce the amount of navigable water in the inner harbor for all boats. And of course, the Hanlan's Ferry would have to go way around those exclusion zones. This other thing I couldn't quite believe when I read it, but because of those jet blasts, when the planes rev up to take off, they would have to construct a 5.8 meter high jet blast defector wall around the end of both runways, around the perimeter of the runways. Why would they need that? Because it actually says the thrust is so powerful, it potentially could upset or capsize small boats that came too close into the marine exclusion zone. Can you imagine somebody with a canoe or a kayak going towards Hanlan's and all of a sudden being turned over by this jet blast? So that's a quote from the environmental assessment. Next one, the runway extension will have considerable, this is another quote, considerable effect on the maneuverability in the Western Gap Channel for small and even large recreational boats. And the last, I think, which is a generic one, is the simple loss of peace, tranquility, enjoyment for Torontonians and visitors. The reality is that introduction of jets, as proposed at that time and perhaps the same now or more, will change the look and feel of the waterfront as a special place to experience the water, parks, and diversity of activities for all ages, and will change how the waterfront is perceived by non-users. Those words are an exact quote from the environmental assessment. They said it will change the look and feel of the whole inner harbor and the waterfront. Next, let's go to the government mandate for waterfront revitalization. And you've seen some of the diagrams that Ron had. We'll talk about built form and land use conflicts. And there's a lot of uncertainty if the building heights that have been proposed for Oakley-Minising, their former Villiers Island, Quayside at Parliament Street, and especially East Harbor, the major construction where the former soap factory was, if they would have to be scaled back to about a 30-story limit to accommodate the much longer and lower approaches that are needed for jets. Right now, these STOL planes can come in pretty high and then sort of dive down into the harbor to the runway. Jets need a much longer, slower approach. And so they could all be impacted and obviously redesigned or reconsidered. That would result in a potential loss of a lot of affordable housing, community facilities, and open space that has now been proposed and approved by a council and other bodies. A third would be that jet traffic at Billy Bishop would likely make the appeal of waterfront living much less attractive for future public and private investment. Developers aren't stupid. They're not going to want to put a new condo building sometime in the future in a landing path of jets for the runway. And I think the real estate values and the changes there, of course, could obviously be impacted. So those are some of the considerations I think we need to look at. Again, there's no proposal right now. What I've said here is based on what I know. But the reality is, what's the bottom line? We only have one waterfront, and we really better be careful with it. It doesn't belong to Billy Bishop exclusively. It belongs to everyone. And I think the introduction of jets would change the look and feel of the whole harbor, as the very environmental assessment for Ports Toronto said themselves. So why put all the risk? Why put all this at risk that we've achieved and where we want to go in the future? I'm going to end with this. It's very important. As everyone said previously, yesterday, the Prime Minister met with the Premier and the Mayor to make the announcements about transit, which was long overdue and much appreciated. This is what the Prime Minister said about the airport. He said, quote, "The federal government is now getting involved, but we're not going to make a premature determination on it." And I think that's very wise, and that's the right approach. So where do we go from here? The next steps, it's essential to actually get a real proposal that we can talk about with some intelligence and get a full environmental assessment that would need to be conducted with extensive public participation. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul. That was great. Thanks very much for that. Okay. Next, I'm going to ask Ed Hoare. Ed, are you there?
I am here.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. I'm just, there you are. I'm going to spotlight you for everyone.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Ed, take it away.
Thanks, everybody. Well, thanks for those great presentations, Ron and Paul. I just wanted to make a couple of remarks, having been kind of involved in this now for over 10 years, that I think people should keep in mind. Ron has really given an excellent overview of the summaries and the studies and the things that have been done about this. And he and I have been working together on this stuff for a long time, and we've actually sort of read all these studies. There's really quite a lot known in a way. about what you need to do to have jets. And I think it's important to kind of go over really what is involved and what we know and what we don't know and what we need to know. So I'm just going to kind of quickly touch on that a little bit. The thing that was frustrating the last time we went through the jets debate, which took about 2.5 years, from 2013 to 2015, is that it was very difficult to get information from Porter, which was the proponent at that time, as to the details of what exactly the proposal was going to look like. What was going to be the actual effect, for example, on the marine exclusion zone, but what was the effect of jet blast going to be, and all of that kind of stuff. And it's really only years later that some of the effects and impacts have now started to leak out, because this environmental assessment has just come out in the last month, as we know. So we now know more, sort of looking back, about that proposal. But what I would suggest is that if we're going to have a debate again about all this, what we should do is we should do it the other way around. This time, let's find out what the physical configuration is. Let's find out what the trade-offs are, and then we can think about whether, in fact, it's worth it. Because some people will say it is worth it. So fine, they can make that case, and maybe it is, but let's find out what is actually involved. The most important thing about the environmental assessment, I would say, and it has all these dire effects, but the thing that you really need to know about it is that the instructions that were given to AECOM, the consultant that did this very thorough thing, it was 1,000 pages long, was that they should deal with TP 312 4th edition and not consider 5th edition, because the theory of Porter Airlines and of Toronto Port Authority was that they could get exemptions and be under the old edition, the 4th edition, as Ron said. What's the effect of that? It means that they didn't consider a bunch of things that the new edition clearly would mean, because the new edition, the 5th edition, has now been enforced for 10 years. So Ron touched on some of these things. Let's just go over them a little bit. As he said, you need to have bigger runways. You need to have more distance between the runways and the taxiways. You need to have, you don't have enough room to park the planes, because the planes are bigger and the runways, and the space is small, because the whole airport is 85 hectares. That's about 210 acres. The next smallest commercial airport with jets, as I understand it, in North America is San Diego Airport, which is around 3 times larger in terms of space. And its runway is about twice as long. So you're trying to do a very remarkable and unusual thing here. You're trying to fit a big commercial airport into a very, very limited space, close to marine activities, parkland, people living there, and of course all of this stuff that we've discussed about higher buildings, more of them, they're getting higher all the time, all of that stuff. So if you're dealing with the 5th edition, what it means is you have to change the airport itself. As Ron said, you have to either move the terminal so it's on the south side, or you have to move the whole runway. So one of the things that they suggested, this is the Oliver Wyman study, was that it might be appropriate to take the old runway and turn it into the taxiway, and then build another runway south of that. So another runway, and it would have to be very wide at the end. Okay, so is that what's involved? What would the physical look like? What would the physical layout be? They said that the marine exclusion zone could not remain the same. It would now have to be somewhere around 150 meters longer at either end and wider. So it appears, and maybe I'm not right, I don't know, but this is what we need to know. Does that mean that the Western Gap would be closed to boat traffic? I believe that it would. That was in fact what one of our original studies said in 2013 by Gordon Wood-Manzi of Transport Action, who I think is listening today probably. So in other words, does it mean that we have to close down the Western Gap, the traditional entrance into the harbor going right back to colonial times? And if we have to close it down to marine traffic, why have it? We might as well just pave it over. Conversely, if we have to move the runway south, we have to construct an entire new runway to the south and parallel to the old runway, which will be the taxiway, which is what the Oliver Wyman consultant said, then does that mean that the Hanlon's Point Ferry is no more? Presumably it does, because the ferry goes quite close to the marine exclusion zone now, and it's going down in there. Does it mean that or not? Maybe I'm wrong. I think it means that that would be shut down. So in effect, we are dealing with, and of course they said you need to have runway approach lighting. Might be 400 meters, it might be 700 meters, we're not sure. There would be a marine exclusion zone around that. You're dealing with a very substantial part of the harbor being closed off to boat traffic. Probably there are other consequences. For example, we haven't talked about bird strikes. There's a lot more birds around than there were before because of the greening of Tommy Thompson Spit. These are big engines. Are birds going to fly in the engines? There are guidelines that Transport Canada has about how far wetlands should be from an airport. I think it was I forget, it was sort of 3.5 miles or roughly. In the US, it's about 5 miles. Does that mean that all the wetlands and all the bird areas around the airport need to be paved over? Let's find out. Let's find that out. Let's know what the trade-offs are before we decide that this is a good idea. Let's think about really what we're losing. So that's the thing that I think is important to stress. Let's do it the other way around. Let's find out physically what we are doing here, and then talk about what are the trade-offs. Let's not do it the way we did it before. The other thing is, there are exemptions. There are numerous exemptions now for the planes to come in steeply, which means that it's different from what the normal rules would be, and that's because of high buildings and so on. As I understand it, there would need to be even more sweeping exemptions. Would Transport Canada approve those? Is the whole thing feasible at all? Is it possible, in fact, that Transport Canada would approve it? Let's find out. Let's get the complex package submitted to Transport Canada so they can say, yes, we'd approve this flight plan, this approach. We would approve it if this bird, area was paved over, or what? What are we talking about? Are we talking about closing the gap, the Western Gap, or not? Are we closing about shutting off the ferry? Are we talking about closing off half the island? Let's find out before we decide. I think that that's absolutely essential this time. Let's learn from how difficult and how painful this debate was before. Let's talk briefly about the cost. So the Oliver Wyman study said in 2015, more than 10 years ago, it would cost about $1 billion. Since it involves moving a terminal and building a whole new runway, wider taxiways, the hangars would have to be on this side, much wider landfill than previously was said. You might have to pave over the Western Gap or shut it off, who knows? Costs about $1 billion. Let's say that that's about $2 billion now. It's more expensive to build on an island, of course. They said that can't be covered by the airport improvement fees, which only bring in about $25 million now annually at Billy Bishop. You could increase the fees, but not nearly enough to cover that, they said. That's their conclusion. They're airport people. They're experts on this. Let's find out about that too. Does it make sense? Where will the money come from? Who will pay for it? Now let's think about duplication of infrastructure. We've got an existing airport at Pearson, and it's about, I think it's 23 kilometers away. So we can build another runway 23 kilometers away, but the economics, as I understand it, and I think we should look into this as well, favor hub and spoke central airports because it's more efficient. Border Airlines has complained in publicly available letters to Billy Bishop that it costs them 3 times as much to operate there. That's why they're starting to leave. They've bought jets, which I think is a very smart thing to do, and they're flying them out of Pearson. They've started to fly them out of Hamilton. It's great. So they're kind of moving out of there gradually. And I think it probably makes sense for them to do that. So let's look at the business case. Does it make sense? Now, one of the things that's really kind of interesting is that People may remember that it was actually January 27th of last year, 2025, Anita Anand, who was transport minister, said that the Pickering lands will not be used for a future airport site. There were numerous studies that supported that had to do with capacity and growth. They looked at Billy Bishop, they looked at Hamilton, they looked at the other regional airports. These are massive studies. There was a particular large sort of multi-study, which was by KPMG and MMM. And they said, we don't see capacity issues in the foreseeable future. So, and they said the most efficient thing is to expand Pearson. That's happening now. Let's make it more pleasant. Let's increase the capacity. And if we do that, we are satisfied that we do not have capacity problems with air travel in Southern Ontario. A lot of money went into those studies. The government had been thinking about that for 50 years. It had been 50 years since they expropriated that land out near Pickering. It's difficult, it seems to me, for the Minister of Transport or the federal government to say, oh, actually, we do have capacity problems, and we've decided to solve them by expanding a very small airport on the waterfront. That's where we're going to spend our $2 billion or more of infrastructure, aeronautical dollars. I think that it doesn't make any sense, but what I really do urge is that we find all that out. We get to the bottom of it. We find out what the trade-offs are, what are the costs, and then we decide. Let's not decide before we know all that. Thanks.
Great. Thanks very much, Ed. Appreciate that. We're just going to dash along to Phil. Phil, are you there?
Right here.
Right here. I'm just trying to find you here. Okay. Phil. Okay. There you are, Phil.
There.
I know there's well over 300 people here, so it's you got to stand out in the crowd, right? So as I said, Phil is from Environmental Defense. He's the Council Ontario Environment Program Manager and Land Use and Development Program Manager for Environmental Defense, and it's a pleasure to have you with us here tonight. Take it away, Phil.
Hey, thanks for having me. As Ed mentioned, I'm with Environmental Defense. And as you know, it is pretty strange for us to be raising the flag of better development inside a city. We're known for fighting against low-density greenfield sprawl development. For example, I was the face of the Hands Off the Greenbelt campaign, and all of those Hands Off the Greenbelt signs started out in a pile next to my desk. Within cities, you'll know us for advocating, often very aggressively and passionately, for forms of development that will really increase the share of the GTA's jobs and population growth that get accommodated within existing neighborhoods. So that includes a lot of development that a lot of people used to be uncomfortable with. Things like mid-rise family apartment buildings, 4- and 6-story multiplex family apartments, and neighborhood shops and restaurants, cheek by jowl with single and semi-detached homes in what used to be exclusively low-rise, low-density neighborhoods. So these are absolutely vital for us because every home and office and commercial workplace we don't build within existing neighborhoods is another piece of farmland or rural habitat lost to sprawl. And also because the vast majority of new neighborhoods or existing neighborhoods need those homes just to reach the bare minimum population and job densities. They need to be environmentally sustainable and cost effective. So why are we stepping outside of our ordinary wheelhouse to engage with this Billy Bishop announcement? Well, firstly, is because the most visible booster of this project, who happens to be the Premier of Ontario, is openly admitting that if the federal government does what he's hoping it will do, it will kill thousands of new homes and thousands of non-market homes in particular here within the city. These are the hard-won homes in the in-progress Uquamin Minising development right next door to the island airport. And they would pull out a key linchpin of that project, the 40 and 50-story towers that make it viable to include so many non-market affordable homes in that development by putting them in the flight path of jet aircraft. The Premier is explicitly saying himself that if he gets his way, if the feds do what he wants, tall apartments are not going to happen because they'll block the runway. So this would squander decades of design and decades of planning reform, and it would squander the $1.4 billion of infrastructure that have already been invested by the City of Toronto, the federal and provincial governments, to unlock these lands for a mixed income, mixed use, pedestrian and transit-oriented neighborhood. And it would push people who would have been living car-free in this new development into sprawl instead, or even out of the Southern Ontario altogether. But that's not necessarily or really the biggest reason, and that's mostly been touched on already. The other danger, and the one that I really want to focus on, is this. The only way for this project to be rammed through, the way its proponents are hinting at, is if your federal MPs decide to make it the test case and maybe make you the guinea pigs for circumventing our federal health, environmental, and safety protections using the draconian federal Bill C-5. Note that I'm talking about federal laws and the federal Bill C-5. Contrary to the impression that Premier Ford has been trying to create by going through the motions of saying that this will be a provincial special economic zone, virtually all of the legal health, environmental, and safety regulations that apply to Billy Bishop and apply to you in relation to Billy Bishop are federal laws, because Billy Bishop is an airport and airports are federal undertakings within federal jurisdiction. For pretty much any other project in any other location, especially one in a densely populated area, designating a provincial special economic zone really would be a big deal. It would be a nightmare. It would effectively replace residents and workers' legal, health, and environmental and safety protections with the naked whims of the provincial cabinet. But because the provincial government can't circumvent federal laws, which are the ones that govern this project and your health and safety in relation to it, the federal government remains fully responsible for applying all the same federal laws and reviews as it would in the absence of a provincial special economic zone. That includes all the statutory protections for nearby resident safety, for fisheries, for endangered species, for against erosion, for ship traffic, for migratory bird nesting and habitat, for protection against bird strikes and noise pollution and air pollution and interference with harbor flushing. It is the federal government's responsibility, just as it would be otherwise in the absence of a provincial special economic zone, to address the real losses of real estate value, impacts on housing, impacts on existing businesses, increases in car traffic that might be associated with this proposal. And it's the federal government's responsibility to weigh the costs and benefits of this proposal relative to the expanded use of the Pearson Airport. So that's good news in a way, but it also means that the only way to circumvent all the legal protections for health and safety in relation to this project and for the environment in relation to this project, and to move forward the way its proponents seem to be saying should happen, would be for your local government side federal MPs to make a political decision to let that happen. And they would do that by using the dangerous discretionary power to designate a national interest project, and by using the Henry VIII clause in Section 1 of Bill C-5 to simply slash and burn through all of the applicable health and safety protections. So why the heck did Premier Ford make this massive, dramatic production of promising to implement a federal special economic zone, or sorry, a provincial special economic zone for a federal undertaking and federal protections that can't be circumvented by provincial law? We were initially confused ourselves, but now we think we know what's going on. We have seen the province do this already when it was trying to deter the federal government from reinstating a federal impact assessment for the Highway 413. But here's their game plans. By creating the false impression that this is to any significant degree a provincial decision, and maybe by creating a false sense of momentum and inevitability, the provincial government is trying to create political cover for your federal MPs to circumvent federal protections, and maybe to put pressure on the federal government to get out of the way, because look, it's all in motion. The premier doesn't have, or in his mind need, seats in downtown Toronto or anywhere near this airport. So he's actively trying to make himself our whipping boy and take the heat off your individual federal MPs and off the federal government. So what's the key takeaway? It's very simple. This massive expansion of Bishop Airport and whatever negative consequences come with it will only happen the way that it's been discussed, or in any way at all, if your federal Liberal MPs and their caucus decide that they want to make it happen by circumventing your statutory rights and protections. If they decide, if you tell them, if they decide that they don't want it to happen, then it does not need to happen at all. And because the federal Bill C-5, and because really what's being proposed is a accelerated project, this is entirely a political decision. The only way that this will happen, the way the proponents say they want to, is if they make a political decision to replace your statutory protections, your health and safety regulations with the arbitrary whim, in this case, of the federal cabinet. So keep the pressure. If you want this to stop, if you don't want it to happen, demand clear, crystal clear, unambiguous commitments that they will not let it happen from each and every one of your individual MPs. Not just general process requirements, clear, specific commitments that they will not invoke the federal Bill C-5 or in any way curtail or circumvent or accelerate the ordinary processes that would apply to protect your health and safety and protect the environment in relation to this project. If they can do that, do not believe them if they claim it's out of their hands. It's entirely within their hands. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Phil. I really appreciate that. And we're just going to go straight to Norm. And Norm,
Mhm.
you're going to keep it super brief, right? You're
Super
going to
brief. It's like you read my mind.
super brief. So Norm is from No Jets TO. We'll ask you to speak, and we will hang around for we don't have time. We don't have an opportunity to take questions from people directly. There's too many people in the room, but we will I will select some questions and some points that have been made over the course of the chat, which is going to form part of the report that we post later at waterfrontforall.ca. So just wanted to say that. So go take it away, Norm.
Great. Hopefully you all can see my screen, and off I go. So I'm going to be brief, and I will skip over things that are already discussed so that we have a little time at the end. So who are No Jets TO? Some of you are meeting us for the first time here. We are a nonpartisan grassroots coalition that strives to protect the existing tripartite agreement between Toronto, the Port Authority, and the federal government. We oppose jet expansion of the island airport. We support the mixed use vision of Waterfront Toronto for our waterfront, which has paid many, many dividends. We are not opposed to the current island airport or opposed to jets per se. We told Porter to fly them from Pearson. I'm so glad they finally listened. So we have 20,000 plus petitions now signed across Toronto. You can sign the petition at nojetsto.com. It goes to your MP, MPP, councillor, mayor, prime minister, minister of transport, all in one shot. A very quick history lesson on this. So, as discussed already, the city entered the Tripartite Agreement in 1983. Believe it or not, Mike Harris was the first person to call for jets at the island airport. He was defeated shortly after that. Then Mel Lastman brought to council a vote for a bridge to the island airport, which council passed. Then David Miller, ran for mayor under the promise to kill that bridge to stop the Pearson on the Lake. Victory number one. Then Toronto Port Authority in 2011 built a tunnel instead of a bridge. In 2013, Porter Airlines CEO Robert Deleuze calls for jets, and No Jets TO was born. 2014, City Council passed a phased framework that, as you pass through phase 1, 2, 3, you were getting closer and closer to that expansion goal. But I think it was very reasonable and showed that the city is willing to engage on this topic. And then in 2015, federal Liberals opposed jet expansion after No Jets TO did the groundwork of talking to Torontonians from Scarborough to Mimico and all around the city of Toronto. We built that ground support, and the federal Liberals opposed jet expansion. Victory number two. Now, Premier Ford, just in March, calls for jets, strips environmental rights and protections through Bill 5, and threatens to take the airport land from the city, and No Jets TO reforms. And here we are. I'm going to skip through this just for the sake of time. This is what that phased approach the City of Toronto approved for jet expansion. There were various gates that they had to pass, restrictions on ground noise and other things, noise monitoring, reporting, air quality monitoring. And as they passed through one phase, they could go to the next and, potentially get to phase 3 where, things like jets might be considered. So I think the city is willing and able to engage on this. Looking ahead in this fight, so as I mentioned, we reformed when Ford called for jets in March. There are key by-elections, federal by-elections in University of Rosedale and Scarborough Southwest. And if anybody would like to support those campaigns, please do reach out at nojetsto.com. In spring, Ford is going to introduce legislation at Queen's Park to take city land and strip all environmental rights and protections away and attempt to insert themselves into the Tripartite Agreement. And then, probably over this year and next year, there will be island airport consultations. This is what we have heard from the federal MPs who have responded. They have promised some sort of, ability for Torontonians to have their say. Now, I really hope this consultation is not led by the Toronto Port Authority. This is like the fox running a consultation on the hen house. They wrote a letter to the province of Ontario requesting the city to be taken out of this process and, have been disingenuous at best. Please go to nojetsto.com, sign the petition, sign up for updates, and help us participate and advocate for a clean, green waterfront for all. Thank you.
That was
That's it for me.
Yeah, that was great. That was record breaking. That was good. I'm sure we're going to send that bottle of Lengthening over to you tonight. The 18-year-old one we keep in the secret waterfront for all, Scotch safe. Okay, so I'm going to. So there have been a number of discussions. We've had some people here this evening who are with us, which we welcome all viewpoints. But we've had some people who are pro, or at least believe that they're inclined to be pro jets at the airport, and asked if there were pro jet speakers. And I would say no. Actually, we're not going to be hosting pro jet speakers at this time. And certainly, as you know, we haven't done so tonight. So I think the range of views tonight would be questioning, demanding a full and thorough study of any actual proposal. As many of our speakers have mentioned, there is no actual proposal in front of us. Or those who are adamantly opposed to jets at the airport for many of the reasons that have been stated this evening. So I just want to point out one thing, and if you'll indulge me for a moment, that the current political framework is one where we see every single independent professional polling firm in the country uh, showing that the current federal government has a massive majority in its hands. Now, obviously, if there were actually a full election, we all know elections can change things. But they also have shown consistently that the prime minister has a more than 20 point above anyone else approval rating. So I only say that as a thought that when we oppose things that we think the federal government might entertain or we question it, um, people are free to do as they wish, of course, and I respect people's different ways of approaching things. But I'm just throwing it out there that sometimes a useful way of framing this is to take the government's agenda seriously, the overall agenda, build Canada strong, increase the economic activity, and then pose a question, especially, and actually I'll just share this, especially given the recent announcement of, actually, I can't share that yet. I just have to get it set up. But the recent announcement yesterday regarding, here we are, the transit expansion of the LRT and more money for housing and more and other moves. Um, because of course this is, as it says, governments commit to advance transit to unlock housing, jobs, and a connected eastern waterfront. So in fact, this is within the broader frame of the federal government's announced Build Canada Strong agenda. So one thing to think about is here's something that's actually funded. It's actually happening, as Paul noted, continuing the work of Waterfront Toronto and the City of Toronto over many, many years to bring this to fruition. Some of us remember conversations in the 90s about this sort of thing. I know back in the 1900s, as my youngest says. So the question, that might be posed to, for example, Liberal members of Parliament, to the Minister of Transportation, to the Prime Minister's office is, does a consideration of expanding YTZ to be a jet airport, does it conflict with this vision? I mean, again, there as people in the chat have mentioned Hamilton Airport, right? Many of you have mentioned Hamilton Airport. It's an existing airport. It could be expanded for probably far less than the cost of redoing the Toronto Island Airport. One could imagine a spur line, a GO train line, or an LRT line to Hamilton Airport, for example, which would again connect it to the broader transit network in the Greater Toronto and Hamilton area. We are, of course, actually extending the crosstown. Eglinton Crosstown is being extended west. The western extension is already underway, and it will, in due course. Hopefully, it won't be another 13 years, but it is planned to connect to Pearson Airport and provided yet another transit connection to Pearson. And as Ed Hoare mentioned, Pearson is actually starting a major expansion, and they have also been talking for about 5, 6 years about a major transit hub, a multimodal transit hub at Pearson Airport, a kind of Union Station North. And they've been trying to advance that to any and all who care to listen. So there are many ways to foster economic development, and to date, we have been choosing, certainly since 2015, despite that conversation on jets that Ed and Ron talked about, we've been choosing to do so by investing in the redevelopment and revitalization of the waterfront, parks, housing, commerce, activities, water, etc. So I mean, I don't know. I'm personally encouraged by the fact that the government wants to invest in this, and I'm just throwing that out there as a way to consider how we might frame this. Um, I've also been asked to, I'll say this too. Yes, we are, as we mentioned, we are going to post a recording of this at waterfrontforall.ca. we'll try and do that as soon as we can. We are an all volunteer organization. We rely entirely on on volunteer labor and donations from our friends and supporters and members. I'm very pleased to say that we've received a large number of donations in response to the emails we sent out. Large for us, which is still pretty modest by comparison to many other organizations. And we will also be sharing a version of Ron's presentation and links. I put the link to environmental defenses statement on the special economic zone. I put that in the chat. We'll also share that again in a post on waterfrontforall.ca. So I think that's really the next step is more information sharing, more events. Norm, I'm just going to flip back to you for a second. What's next for you?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
we are as mentioned, like there is a federal by-election up to April 13th, and we're looking to book the Transact for April 7th for a Vote No Jets TO event. We have heard from the Green Party and the NDP so far in terms of opposing Jets to the Island Airport, and we want to continue that momentum and progress. What I expect is Ford is going to drop some legislation at Queen's Park with it, somewhere in the next month that is going to try to expropriate the land, make that special economic zone, as well as try to insert themselves in the Tripartite Agreement. So would be interesting there to see if maybe there could be a legal challenge. But we'll be at Queen's Park one way or another, protesting that. And then we have to see how things break out after that. I expect there'll be hopefully some sort of consultation moving forward, which we would certainly be involved in, and just try to, as Ed and Ron said, just work to get all of the facts on the table before we make any sort of a decision.
Thank you. Phil, what is environmental defense going to be doing on this issue or related issues in terms of supporting housing in the Portlands and the waterfront?
Well, I don't want to reveal all of our cards, but we do have, as usual, a few things brewing, and I imagine you'll hear about a couple of them very soon. We don't intend to, take the lead on the airport per se. I think this is a local resident-led fight. We're here to provide support, but you will see a few very, I think, useful things that will be coming out into the open over the next couple of weeks.
Great, thank you. And Ed, what's Waterfront for All going to be doing?
Well, what we've always been interested in as long as we've existed is kind of civil discussion that's fact-based on these kinds of issues. I didn't actually say that I oppose jets. What I said is let's get information. Let's find out what actually is involved so that then people can weigh the trade-offs. And if there's an economic case, make the economic case and let's all see it in the open. If there's downsides in terms of the harbor and so on and effects on residents and health and housing and so on, let's get out in the open what those are, and let's not wait 7 years for all the facts to dribble out. Let's find that out and then have a political debate, because having a political debate about abstractions is really not that useful.
Absolutely. And again, so I think it's clear to say that Ed, would you say it's fair to say that we're, again, that range of views from opposing to questioning to wanting a full clarification of what it would mean, what it would cost, and what the impacts are, what it would limit, what it would permit, what it would not permit. But I think it's fair to say, Ed, that we're not advocating for jets. I think that's a fair statement.
Based on what I know and having read a lot of studies, I got a big stack of them here and I've read them over the years and Ron's read them and we've talked about them for a long time. It seems frankly hard to do, but I don't know. Show me I'm wrong. I mentioned the study by Gord Wood-Manzi, for example, who's probably tuned in, and he said back in 2013, he wrote this 50-page long thing or something, big long thing. He said, well, it looks like this would mean the Western Gap would be closed. He had very good reasons for doing it. You had very good reasoning, it seemed to me, diagrams and all this rest of it, but there was never any response from Port Authority or from Porter to this day. So you don't know, we don't know what the physical configuration would be. We didn't really know then. We finally got some diagrams, and we heard about jet blast barriers, which had never been acknowledged before. All these kinds of things, they kind of came out later. And the business case about the jobs, there was never a study that really said that. And it seemed, but if we rewrote papers about economics and said, well, it seems like duplication of infrastructure. So what you're doing maybe is you're diverting jobs and activity from Pearson, but it's not additive to the economy. Or if we're wrong, tell us how. So our case, folks out there, is, there's all kinds of papers out there. Most of them are on our website of what we think. And we may be wrong, of course. We're mortals, and we may have made a mistake somewhere. But if it is, please tell us where. Tell us where. Tell us where we're wrong. Take our arguments and trash them. We would welcome it.
Paul, I don't think you think we're wrong, do you?
No, I don't. And I think all I can say is let's get a real proposal. Enough of this nonsense of newspaper articles. Get a real proposal if they're serious. Get it out there, full consultation, do an environmental assessment, have a political debate, and then, make the choice. But I just remind everybody, all choices have consequences, whatever they are. And, like I said, we've only got one waterfront. We better not screw it up. So those are my views, and I feel very strong about it.
Thank you very much, Paul. Well, friends, it's 8:51 and it's been a long evening, and I think we're going to wrap it now. But don't worry, we are going to have other events. Certainly, I think we're going to have other events, Waterfront for All, and we're happy to do them with with other cooperating entities like No Jets. Perhaps maybe we'll do an event with Phil's organization if that would make sense at some point. But we certainly plan to follow this up very soon with other examinations of impacts and housing in Portlands, and also perhaps we'll talk about the new transit and new initiatives that have finally been approved. Someone mentioned actually, Paul, when did we start talking about the extending the LRT to the Portlands? When did we start talking about that?
Oh, I don't know, 15 years ago, something like that.
We've also had some really interesting initiatives to do with a big island in Humber Bay with a conference center, and cruise terminal. So there's just no end of excitement about some of these proposals, and maybe we'll be dealing with some of those in the future. I would just mention that I mentioned the Oliver Wyman study. It's on our website now. There's a thing called News and Media, which is a little menu we have, and we've sort of put down what we think are kind of some good things to read, and tried not to keep them too heavy or anything like that. So you can read some stuff now. Ron, as he said, he's going to put some reading material. There's actually, if you're interested in this, there is material that is illuminating on it. So we want to make that kind of available and encourage discussion of that stuff, and encourage views, pro and con. I think that's really what makes sense for our city. Oh, and we want to rattle the tin cup. We have been getting some donations in, but we wouldn't mind getting more. We'll put them to good use, we promise.
Waterfrontforall.ca. Yeah, waterfrontforall.ca. There's a donate button on the top of the page. So please, if you are able to, if you haven't donated to us, it's $20 for an annual membership, $140 for a lifetime membership. So now we are an advocacy group, and a nonprofit, so we don't have charitable status, but we do appreciate it because, again, we survive on the kindness of strangers. So thanks again. Thanks, Rod. Thanks, Norman. Thanks, Phil. Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Ed. We'll see you soon again. Waterfrontforall.ca. We will be posting a recording of this in due course, and we will be sharing as much information as we can and talking about related waterfront issues as always. Thank you very much, everyone, Bonne soirée. Good night.